Chester County Archives has three series of 18th century tax records: county, provincial, and state. For research purposes, all three generally provide the same information because they were all recorded using the same process. The only obvious difference between these three series is who ordered the tax and what the public funds were used for. County taxes were obviously raised by the county to pay for county buildings, county salaries, and county services, while provincial and state taxes were raised to support the provincial and state governments. Interestingly, several of the taxes raised between 1778 and 1783 were state and federal supplies taxes, meaning the new Continental Congress, in other words, the new federal government of the United States, said, hey, we need financial assistance from you 13 states in order to beat the British, so give us money. So if your ancestor paid one of these supplies taxes between 1778 and 1783, well then they literally helped secure and finance American independence. Now, while there are three series of taxes, again, county, provincial, and state, there are four formats the tax records can be in: returns, assessments, rates, or appeals. Let's take a closer look. When a tax was ordered, the county commissioners issued warrants to individual township tax assessors, directing them to go out and return a list of all the taxable inhabitants residing in their respective townships along with their property. So that's the first type of tax record, the return. In June 1785, the local assessor in Tredyffrin Township returned to the county a list of the names of the taxable inhabitants along with the number of acres they held, number of horses, cattle, sheep, servants, and enslaved persons, as well as any notable sites like mills, distilleries, or public houses. You'll see the inmate and freeman categories that we discussed in the last video appear in the returns, but notice at this point in the tax process there are no values or rates assigned. The local township tax assessors took their returns and gave the list to the county tax assessor, an elected official. The county assessor then assigned value to the property and created tax assessments, the second record. The assessments are generally the most detailed tax record because they include a lot of the same information that's in the return plus property values. But not every piece of information included in the returns was copied over into the assessments. Sometimes the township assessor noted if a person was too poor or unable to pay a tax for whatever reason. Well, those names will not appear in the subsequent records because there was no tax to pay or to collect. In the 1785 Tredyffrin Township return, the local assessor simply noted William Potts held 100 acres, 3 horses, 3 cows, and 12 sheep. He returned the list to the county assessor, who said, okay, those 100 acres are valued at £6 per acre, for a total of £600. The horses, cattle, and sheep were also assessed, and the county valued his property at a total of £646. Based on his property value, the assessor then assigned William Potts a tax rate that he was responsible for. In this example, £3 and 2 pence. The county assessor did this for all taxable inhabitants, then consolidated lists for the township tax collectors. These lists of tax rates are the third tax record. The rates are simply a list of taxable inhabitants and the amount of taxes they owed. Once the assessor gave the township tax collector the list of rates, the collector went around the community bugging his neighbors for money. It's interesting to see how many people refused the job of tax collector. You can imagine this job was stressful. Not only did he have to collect taxes from his friends and neighbors, but the collector was also fined by the county if he failed to collect the full amounts listed on the rates. Once the collector made his rounds, there was an appeals process. Taxpayers could argue they paid too much in taxes and request an abatement or discount, while the tax collector could argue why he did not collect certain taxes, like perhaps a person was too sick, too poor, deceased, or maybe they moved. We're going to cover tax discounts in a future video because there's some really useful information in this fourth kind of tax record. When we look at these 4 steps, it's important to realize every step is further removed from the original source. The information recorded in the tax returns were acquired directly on the ground from the original source, in other words, the taxable person. The assessments, however, were based on the information recorded in the returns, and the rates were determined by the assessments. So you see there's a chain of information, and the further away from the original source you go, the likelihood of mistakes or inaccuracies increases. Now, 1765 is a really important year for studying tax records in Chester County. 1765 is the first year we have surviving tax assessments, meaning all of our taxes before 1765 are simply tax rates with one exception. The 1726 tax return for Thornbury Township has survived, and it's really incredibly detailed. It gives us a little sense of all the valuable historical data that has been lost. As expected, we see the names of the taxable persons along with their taxable property, including enslaved persons and servants. And check out these insightful notes. Charles Howell had a wife and child. Samuel Williams was a servant to Gaynor Pierce. Deborah Nail, the widow of Henry Nail, had one Negro woman. And the assessor noted that William Clues ought not to be assessed by reason that he helps to maintain his poor aged mother, Eleanor. This record is a nice reminder that just because you don't see your ancestor or research subject in the final tax rates, that does not mean they were not there. Individuals who the local assessor deemed too poor, like William Clues, were immediately dropped from the rolls and would not appear in subsequent tax assessments or rates. But again, this record is the exception, because all of our other pre-1765 Chester County tax records are rates, simply lists of names and taxation rates. Imagine how enriched our historical understanding of colonial Chester County would be if similar tax records had survived. And this is why it's really a challenge doing any type of property research before 1765. But the returns and assessments are the most useful because they often list property size and buildings. The rates, they don't. But still, knowing when someone resided in a certain township and paid taxes is still really valuable information, so the rates are certainly better than nothing.